I don't know if I'm very generous or if I'm a sucker for punishment, because I'm willing to take a risk and take a look at something else from IDW Publishing, being the Shattered Glass 2 story. Now, anybody who knows me and has been around the channel, I am not a fan of that company. I'm not a fan of the way that they handle stories or storytelling. I have a lot of problems with not just Transformers. I love comic books, and I could never get behind this particular company. It just wasn't my thing. But I took a chance with Shattered Glass, and there were a lot of issues there. Things that just weren't true to the already established fiction, to the ideas already understood by Shattered Glass fans. Nevertheless, I do want to give opportunity where I can, and so I'm going to be looking at these. Fairly in-depth. Will this be better than the original 5-part story? We're about to find out in the latest GotBot True review. Hey one, hey all, welcome back to the channel. I'm your host, your most humble of hosts, Dennis Moulton, aka GotBot. As always, man, please like, comment, share, of course, subscribe, and while you're at it, light 'em up, baby. Hit that notification bell, please. It helps me out a ton and lets you know when content of all sorts goes up here on the channel. Check out Machinery of Man, The Everything Factor, all the groups that I'm either a mod or an admin for, as well as all of my social media links. All that in the description down below, also in the description down below. And if you're in a position to help the channel to grow, you can use the donate link. Check us out on Patreon, see what we have to offer to you through spring, or of course, hit the join button at any given time and become a channel member. Now, as I said, I've never been a huge fan of the company. I get it. There's a certain cult following of the Transformers comics. And to be fair, while I love Transformers and I love comics, and I've said this a million times, I've never been a fan of them together. Like, I read some of the Marvel stuff when I was a kid. I've never read any of the Dreamwave stuff, I don't think. And I've tried on numerous occasions to jump in on IDW, but I've always found the storytelling... Actually, I don't know if it's the storytelling or if it's the editing, or sometimes both. I've always found everything to be very plotting. A lot of it is left to your assumptions to draw conclusions rather than being explicitly explained. As an educator, as an author, I know how a story is supposed to be done. I know how writing is supposed to be done, and I just see a lot of things here that if I was the editor, I would absolutely change and go back and say, yeah, no, this needs to be redone. It's never been my thing. But I took a chance with the original Shattered Glass, and when I read that 5-part story, as much as I wanted to like it, there was a lot I didn't like. I didn't feel like Optimus Prime or Orion Pax was showcased nearly enough for the story. I know a lot of the body types were definitely changed and stylized from what they were originally, but I get it. You're using newer molds. There were blatant errors and mistakes. For example, they talked about having sparks. But if you know Shattered Glass, they don't have sparks, they have embers. There are some prominent characters that I expected to see more of that we did not see more of. There were just certain tenets that didn't land for me. And I felt like the severe amount of time jumps became very confusing and convoluted to the story. And by the very end, we had an open-ended ending. We had never had a confirmation that we were getting more Shattered Glass or that there was going to be a Shattered Glass 2. So having an open-ended ending to the story with essentially what looks like Goldbug winning and having, you know, a spark of Starscream that he's able to use to like reanimate Titans, like it looked like we were left to assume that Goldbug won. Such is life. I don't like open-ended endings either. That's a subjective thing, I'll admit. But it's not my thing, and it did not help me to become ingratiated and endeared to this company anymore. So I went into this with very much lowered expectations. Was this better than I thought it would be? Was it better than the first outing for Shattered Glass? Well, without any further ado... Oh, I'll mention this, by the way, before we go over. There will be several spoilers throughout. If you want to avoid them, then pop back to the kind of end of the video where we come back right here, where I will kind of give some final thoughts and try to keep it spoiler-free for you if that's your thing. So now, without any further ado, let's head over to the table, technically, and take a closer look at this story. So let's kick things off with a little bit of a recap. First thing to note, there will be spoilers here. If you don't want spoilers, I advise you go to kind of toward the end of the video when we go back to like the intro, outro type of environment where I will try my best there to kind of offer my thoughts without spoilers. But let's start things off with kind of a bit of a recap. So I guess the couple of things to note is that I already looked at, I guess, Shattered Glass 1, which was issues 1 through 5, and I was far less than impressed with it. I looked at that back in March of 2022. And just as a little bit of history, Shattered Glass certainly gained prominence in BotCon 2008. And some tenets there are that Optimus Prime is basically insane and he talks to corpses. They have embers instead of sparks. One of the main locations is Polyhex instead of like Iacon, for example. Megatron is a mathematician, and the ability to transform really was derived from him because the Decepticons needed a way to hide from the Autobots. Ultra Magnus and Optimus Prime are brothers. They really don't get along, and a lot of times Ultra Magnus tries to usurp Optimus Prime's power. He knows the law, but he doesn't have like a moral, I don't want to say bone circuit in his body, and he ends up changing his body to upgrade to Optimus for revenge. He only has a couple of allies and kind of confabs with the maniacal Alpha Trion, and even ends up with the Terminus Blade, and kind of, you know, long story short, by the end, he sort of gets banished as a imprisonment by Nexus Prime, who takes both the Starsaber from the positive universe and the Terminus Blade from the negative universe into his control for whatever reason. He's one of the original 13, I guess. He will keep them safe. So that's just a preamble of history. Now, what about what happened in, we'll say, Series 1 as a quick overview? Let's see if I can summarize this down quickly. So in issue 1, which was Blur's issue, we find out that Blur's a bounty hunter. He talks about Gold City, which is really Goldbug's city, area that he controls. He visits Ratchet, who is failing to build whatever the unbeatable is. Goldbug wants Starscream alive because he needs Starscream's spark for something. Blur plans to convince Starscream to meet Goldbug rather than try and like capture the bounty. And by the end, they have a little scuffle, Blur and Starscream, and Blur ends up getting covered really by volcanic lava as Starscream gets away. Right away, this will hurt something later on because one of Ultra Magnus's allies was Blur, and, well, now that's not really going to work. In issue 2, we see Megatron in the desert. He talks about being in solitude and how he wasn't a great leader and he done more harm than good. Starscream somehow finds him. I never did figure out exactly how he found him. I'm also not sure how Blur helped Starscream to find him and get him one step closer. Anyway, Starscream passes out. There's talk of history that Megatron caused in a series of flashbacks to like protests outside the Senate. He argues with Prowl and he gets in trouble with the law. Orion Pax kind of gets him off with it because they're like old friends. This time Megatron was a miner, not a mathematician, and that class was being treated like dirt basically. Ratbat is a backbencher. He's a senator, but he's a backbencher, so really has no power. Starscream needs a leader and says that Megatron is it. And Megatron says, I'm no leader. And we go back in time again. Orion belittles Megatron's cause. Megatron, in the present, says that his cause and his fight only hurt the Decepticons. Optimus Prime, Prowl, and Goldbug are kind of three warlords that control different areas and do a lot of infighting. Starscream says that Megatron was a great leader. Megatron has had destroyed B. B was rebuilt as Goldbug. There's ramblings about Starscream's spark and what it can do. It's somehow related to Titans. That brings us to issue 3. In issue 3, Megatron and Starscream meet up with Soundwave and Ravage and Laserbeak. Soundwave is basically a haven for traumatized Decepticons. We learned that he was the morale officer during the war because he's very charismatic. There's a flashback to Jetfire and Starscream. They still have a relationship. Looking for Orion Pax, they look to Orion Pax for funding so that they can do tests on the inert Titans, right? The Titans that are not awake. and I guess it's like a science experiment, basically. Pax says, if you're just looking to find out about the history, then you're not going to get funding. Find a military purpose, and you'll probably get the funding. Pax wants to control the Titans. He doesn't want to learn from them. I'm not sure when Pax becomes Optimus Prime or Optimus Prime becomes Orion Pax. That's unclear exactly when that changed. Blaster and the cassettes are present, and they seek the bounty for Starscream as well from Goldbug. Everybody wants Starscream, right? Megatron holds off Blaster as Starscream escapes. It all of a sudden juts to Jetfire talking to Orion Pax from long ago, so this is another flashback, and seeks the funding again. Starscream hears everything that Jetfire says, and in what seems to be like a third time period, he's chased by Jetfire and some of the Autobots as he heads toward the Titan. We learn that Starscream's spark is strong enough to commune with Titan, so he's kind of like a city speaker. Jetfire and Goldbug arrive. It's unclear why Jetfire is now associated with Goldbug, but he is. In issue 4, Goldbug never wanted to be weak again, so all of this is like because Goldbug wants to be tough, right? If he controls the Titan, then he's tough. Skywarp teleports in to try and rescue Starscream. I have no clue how he knew where to teleport into Gold City to find Starscream. Gold City was named for Goldbug. Goldbug rips Skywarp's head off, and it's a warning for Megatron, basically. Like, look what I can do, right? In what seems like a flashback, we see him talking to Orion Pax, saying Prowl is suspicious. Orion Pax ignores Goldbug, which was like belittling to Goldbug, right? He even calls Goldbug Bumblebee as an insult. In the present, Goldbug and Jetfire hang out with Slicer. Goldbug throws Skywarp's head at Starscream's feet and says Megatron couldn't be bothered to save you himself. Just give up. It's unclear what they want. Starscream makes fun of Goldbug rather than kind of validate his power, right? Jetfire says if you fry Starscream, says to Goldbug, if you fry Starscream, then you're not going to get what you want. The Insecticons arrive and try to be the cavalry. But after stopping the Insecticons, Goldbug points his bazooka at a chained up Starscream, and that takes us to the finale of the first season with issue 5. Jetfire is pretty beat up. He says basically that he lacks strength. In the present, he tries to reason with Goldbug. He's torn, right, between his friend and Goldbug's power, I suppose. Jetfire punches Goldbug, but Goldbug shoots Starscream in the back. Goldbug reaches into the wound and takes out Starscream's spark, so, like, that was kind of vicious. And then he goes outside for some reason. The Cons and the Autobots are fighting in Gold City, and Gold City is basically falling. Jetfire loses it, and he flies off with Starscream's body and blames everyone for the loss of his friend. Then we see Slicer report to Ultra Magnus that Gold City will fall. Prowl and Prime will likely keep fighting with each other, but he who controls the spark of Starscream, which is Goldbug, will control the Titan and thereby Cybertron. And that's where it ends. So it was a very open ending with Goldbug having Starscream's spark, Jetfire flying off with Starscream's body, and Slicer reporting to Ultra Magnus about the fighting in Gold City. It's going to fall, and we expect there will be a power vacuum between Prowl and Optimus Prime. I didn't like a lot of what was there. Too open-ended. It wasn't clear when they were doing flashbacks and what was present. A lot of coincidental things that just didn't seem connected or to land to me. So I thought that the first series was quite rough. What about the second one? Well, this one was written by Danny Lohr, and I have to say, despite my criticisms of IDW, despite my criticisms of Shattered Glass 1, I think Shattered Glass 2 is doing a far better job. So let's get into the nitty-gritty just a little bit. Okay, so here is the summary, so to speak, of issue 1. Now, one thing to note that took me a while to actually catch on to, because it's not overtly explained, is that flashbacks have panels that have rounded corners, slightly rounded corners, and what's happening in the present have very squared off 90-degree corners on their panels. Worth noting, this is written by Danny Lohr. The art of this issue is by Marcelo Mater. I have no idea if I'm saying that right, and Andrew Griffith. So like I said, it seems to be a flashback where we learn that Magnus is legally advising Orion Pax as Pax is a senator. He is also talking to a pre-Impurata Senator Shockwave, And Shockwave, like, sees some good in Magnus and tries to kind of bring that out. Shockwave still has a face and hands. B kind of interrupts Shockwave and Magnus's conversation, says that, hey, Optimus wants to see, or sorry, Pax wants to see him. So he and the Wreckers end up leaving to go and meet Pax in the past. Also in the present, he and the Wreckers are also going to meet Pax or Optimus, whichever one you want to call it. We see a number of Wreckers here. Springer, Impactor, who's like green and purple, kind of cool. Hot Rod, he'll be a significant character later on. Shattered Glass Jazz, they kind of come upon Optimus's guards being Sunstreaker and a kind of a yellow cowardly, both literally and figuratively, coward of Whirl. But through the jigs and reels, basically, they get sent to the throne room. If you don't know the term jigs and reels, it just means through the ups and downs, through the ins and outs, through the machinations, whatever. Magnus's regular face, we learn, is a hologram, and that Optimus Prime once hired him to basically not only know the limits of his power within the law as he operated in the Senate, but eventually to attack the Senate. They, in the present, talk about Metroplex Awakening and the Goldbug threat. It's very interesting to note here that it's unclear because we see Bumblebee, but then he's talking about Goldbug. You have to remember that the panels with Bumblebee are in the past, before Bumblebee was taken out by Optimus and rebuilt into Goldbug. So at some point, I don't know if Bumblebee served Optimus or if he was a pseudo-wrecker or what. That's not exactly clear, but it's enough to differentiate the past and the present. In the present, Jazz kind of gets lippy with Orion Pax, who is pretty arrogant and dismisses Ultra Magnus's concerns that the Titan is awaking and that, you know, you got to keep an eye out for the Decepticons and you got to keep an eye out for Prowl, who might try to make a move and all this, and you got to keep an eye out on, you guessed it, Goldbug. And Pax says, none of them matter. And Jazz says, oh, that's pretty rude. So Pax says to Magnus, thought you had better control of your men. They go outside and Jazz is still pretty disgruntled. And then we cut to the past where, on the order of Pax, Magnus and the Wreckers invade basically the Senate floor, and they end up taking Shockwave for Impurata. In the present, as soon as they're outside of the throne room, Magnus says, you know what, like Optimus or Orion Pax, whatever name he's going by now, yeah, he has no plan. He's not seeing the seriousness of this, but it's a good thing I do. And he orders the Wreckers basically to attack the other Autobots that are out there. There's a big argument and a big fight. And basically, Optimus comes out and is like, what's up here, guys? And there's a fight between Magnus and Optimus, and lo and behold, by the end of the issue, Magnus is standing over a fallen Optimus. At least this ties in a little bit better. It's not stated that Magnus and Optimus are brothers in this issue. It's a little haphazard with the jumps of the flashbacks in the present. But at least there is that move by Ultra Magnus to kind of take out Optimus or Orion Pax, whatever name he's going by, which does fall in line with kind of the traditional story. So I think the editing could have been done better here, or maybe they could have clarified the jumps between flashbacks and present. But overall, I feel like this was a little more in line with the personalities and the established fiction that we sort of already know. This felt like more of a revisioning rather than a completely out of touch, completely disconnected type of story, which I felt like the first Shattered Glass was. This feels a little more in line with what I would expect for a revisioning. Take that for what you will for episode or issue 1. And so with Magnus standing atop Optimus Prime's broken body, we move to issue number 2. There's a recap at the beginning. Jazz explains that the only reason Orion Pax has his city is because of Ultra Magnus. We move on to the actual issue, narrated really by Blaster, who's quite arrogant and says he shouldn't be ignored. Rodimus and Slicer meet up with him in what was Gold City, now apparently renamed New Kaon, as the Decepticons, I guess, took over the fallen remains of Goldbug City. There's a power vacuum going on. Slicer asks why Blaster didn't check in with the Wreckers and Magnus after he was beaten by Megatron and Starscream. He doesn't really get much of an answer, though. Rodimus claims that Blaster is a Wrecker's deserter, and, you know, what we do to deserters, right? Rodimus and Slicer are there to be a disruptive force in the new emerging power base in Kaon. And they want to really rattle the cage with Soundwave. Now, we're not really sure exactly what that means yet, but we will find out soon enough. Rodimus clearly hates Blaster and his failures of the past. Failure to get Starscream Spark, for example. He, Rewind, Ramhorn, and Steeljaw are tasked with infiltrating, basically, Soundwave's, I can't remember what it's called, but like his audio layer, where he puts out his radio signals, kind of calling all Decepticons to his safe haven. Go in and basically take that out and download any useful information from Soundwave that you can. So they go in and kind of split up. We learn that Eject is dead. Megatron and Jetfire seem to be working together to find Starscream's Spark that Goldbug stole. Bored of watching them have a conversation, Blaster uses like his sonic ability to kind of irritate Jetfire and Megatron so that they'll start fighting amongst themselves, or at least having a little bit of an argument. Ramhorn kind of butts in and says that he found the source of Soundwave's transmission, which is exactly what they were looking for. So Blaster kind of gives up on using his sonic thing to kind of disrupt Jetfire and Megatron and move on, just as Jetfire and Megatron kind of start to become good friends again. Basically, they found the source of like this feel-good radio signal. Blaster goes there and he imitates, I assume he's imitating Soundwave, because to kind of gain access to the inner sanctum, that's like voice recognition. So I guess he has the ability to like mimic Soundwave's voice. Slicer cuts in and notes how Megatron and Jetfire realized that there was a sonic attack on them, so now they're on their guard. Blaster downloads everything from Soundwave's setup, and he ends up leaving when Slicer tells him to. He doesn't, however, destroy the radio HQ because he leaves. He follows Slicer's orders. Slicer says leave, he leaves. Rodimus says, so you failed again. And Rodimus kind of, says, I expected you to fail. He was already after killing all of Blaster's boys, his cassettes, for that failure. So he looks then at Blaster, standing atop really the bodies of Blaster's cassettes, and says, you are no soldier, you're no rock star, you're nothing, you're just a failed reporter. And when he says failed reporter, we flash back in time. It's kind of very clear this time because we have Rodimus's words that are in, I don't want to say a speech balloon, but they're in like its own special speech bubble as we go to the flashback. So it's kind of clear. And when we go to the flashback, we learn that he was a broadcaster, that Blaster was a broadcaster, and that when he thought he was off air, he said that he wanted like a story that was more intriguing and calls the audience brain dead, which basically got him fired. Soundwave replaces him on the news. So he gets kind of bitter against Soundwave because Soundwave was his replacement. He goes back to doing rock shows. And Soundwave even offers to interview Blaster for the station, saying, hey, it's basically a great thing that you're getting success with the rock shows again. But Blaster is just too embittered. And he says, I don't need any handouts. And everybody saw and heard that outburst as well. Blaster basically decides to make his own station. And he basically makes Fox News on Cybertron, right? He's basically Rupert Murdoch. He ends up getting recruited by Magnus and thinks like, Magnus is not going to overlook me. He sees my talent. But in essence, the other wreckers say, yeah, he's just recruited to be cannon fodder. In the present, Magnus actually also, besides for killing the cassettes, he also kills Blaster. And Slicer says, take Blaster and the cassettes outside Kaon, make it look like the Decepticons did it, and they keep Blaster's head because that has the recording of Soundwave in it and is able to, like, I guess able to connect with Soundwave's station. This is significant because as Slicer starts listening to all the information that was downloaded and all of Soundwave's information, he starts to sort of second-guess himself and second-guess his position. Maybe, just maybe, Soundwave has a point after all. This was largely a story about Blaster and his fall from grace, from being a news reporter to kind of how he became embittered and enraged and recruited by the Wreckers, to his fall from grace within the Wreckers as well, having his entire team taken offline, as well as himself by the dangerous and maniacal Rodimus. It was a tragic story, but it was a complete story with a beginning, middle, and end, very clear. Even when we do the flashbacks, it's very, very clear that we're doing the flashbacks. They look slightly different. They still have the rounded corners, and we usually have some speech that leads into it, like from Rodimus. So I actually liked the way that this one worked out. There were no loose ends. Everything was tied up in a nice, neat little package, despite being a to be continued. Right? This could stand on its own merits as its own story. I think it's the best thing I've ever read from this company. And so by the beginning of issue 3 of Shattered Glass 2, we have Magnus, who's bested Pax, or Optimus. We have a disruption to New Kaon's safe haven. We have Blaster taken offline along with his little minions. And now we have Slicer really going on a mission to get to the Titan, where he suspects Goldbug is with Starscream's Spark. This issue actually starts off with Slicer and Ratchet having a discussion about leaving New Kaon, or Gold City, if you will. And Ratchet notes how a lot of his experiments have not survived being put back together. He does talk about the importance of having spare parts and says that Slicer is pretty reckless and he's due to lose an arm. Slicer notes how Ratchet hates change and lives in the past. Inside Blaster's head, Soundwave is still inviting wayward cons to New Kaon, formerly Gold City, as I've mentioned before. Slicer decides that he's going to go to Metroplex. And as he moves closer, he notes how, from afar, Jetfire is able to be seen. Apparently, he discovers through listening through Blaster's head that the Decepticon Airstrike Patrol, that Micromaster team led by Whisper, or Visper, which instead of being purple and black this time around, are more like mostly white and green. They're basically out patrolling because, remember, from last issue, Jetfire and Megatron realized that there was a sonic attack, right? So that's why Jetfire's out going around. That's why the Airstrike Squadron is out going around. Is that what it is? Airstrike Patrol, sorry. In the meantime, what's Slicer doing? He's looking for that brat Goldbug, because Goldbug still has control of Starscream's Spark. So Slicer uses Blaster's head to basically follow static to its source. The static apparently should be Starscream's Spark. I'm not sure exactly how he derives that, but that's what he derives. He finds Goldbug and Starscream's Spark within Metroplex's body. He makes nice with Goldbug so as not to let on that he's actually working for Ultra Magnus. And he notes how Goldbug craves power without an actual plan. And though Goldbug has Starscream's Spark, and has an intention of waking the Titan, Slicer asks him outright, once you wake the Titan, what are you going to do? Goldbug says that Metroplex is basically a pain in the tailpipe. He stops and starts when he wants. So that tells Slicer that Goldbug doesn't have full control of the Titan yet. There's still an opportunity here for the Titan to fall under the control of Ultra Magnus. So Magnus has, beaten Optimus. He's kind of in control of Optimus's forces. And if he can get the Titan, then he can use Optimus's forces and the Titan to take out all of his Autobot and Decepticon enemies and kind of take supreme control for himself. Slicer notes how Blaster's head is the only way to hear about con plans in the Static Zone. That's how he found out about the Airstrike Patrol. Slicer could turn it off, but he tells Goldbug that he can't. Why? Because Soundwave speaking is a distraction and a delay to Goldbug gaining control of the Titan. He also signals for the Wreckers to come before Goldbug gains control, right? So basically, Goldbug and Slicer and Starscream's Spark are inside Metroplex. Goldbug's trying to get control, but Jetfire's closing in, the Airstrike Patrol is closing in, and the Wreckers are closing in. Well, the first to get there are the Airstrike Patrol. They get destroyed by Goldbug, who then turns on Slicer and says that he knows all along that Slicer's loyal to Magnus. Jetfire ends up stomping on Goldbug from behind while Slicer and Goldbug kind of, have a little scuffle. When Jetfire stomps on Goldbug, he kind of destroys him, really, and smashes him into the ground. That leaves Slicer and Jetfire face-to-face with Starscream's Spark. Slicer detonates his arm as the Wreckers show up. And while Jetfire says, that didn't stop me, the Wreckers manage to kind of like lasso Jetfire from behind. So now they have the control of the Spark, and they have Jetfire lassoed. Slicer says that Magnus needs him to activate the Titan. I'm not sure why he would need him to activate the Titan, but he says he does. So for now, Jetfire will be kept alive. Magnus seemingly will get his Titan and destroy the Autobots and the Decepticons all alike. And kind of the last panel of this issue is a bunch of Decepticons making their way to New Kaon. Probably a group to go against the Wreckers. We shall see. But much like the last issue, I feel like that this was a fairly clean issue. We kind of had the climax with the baddie from the first Shattered Glass series being Goldbug, and he is thwarted and stopped, and we have the new baddie set up with Ultra Magnus, and right now nobody is kind of in control of the MacGuffin, which is Starscream's Spark at the moment, which means nobody right now is in control of Metroplex, and New Kaon isn't exactly a utopia or a haven yet. It's still in chaos and dispute between, really, I guess, the Wreckers and the Decepticons. I don't think it was quite as good of an issue as issue 2, but it was still fairly clean. So I thought issue 1 was a little haphazard with all of the flashbacks and flash forwards, or flashbacks in present day, I should say. But I think issue 2 and issue 3, very, very strong offerings, which brings us to 4. And so issue 4 is written again by Danny Lohr. This time we have Daniel Kana doing the artwork, which is nice because he was in one of the earlier issues, and it's nice to see some consistency with people working on them. So I was happy about that. At this point, it looks like Magnus is kind of in control of the game. We start out with a flashback, and this issue is about Flame War, a character I know zero about, nothing. So I had no preconceived notions of this character going into this issue. In the flashback, right away, my introduction to this character is her being drunk on Energex and grieving the loss of her Captain Cannonball. Megatron enters and offers his condolences and says that he has work for the Rising Star, which of course was Cannonball's ship, and this is Cannonball's crew, now led by Slipstream, whose colors are very much like Windblade, a lot of red and black. So I thought that was an interesting way to kind of revision her. Also included in this group of Rising Star rebels, I guess we'll call it, is Shadow Striker, Hotlink, Hailstorm. I feel like there's somebody else, but I can't remember who it is right now. Anyway, I digress. In the present, the rebels are on their way to New Kaon, but in essence, they're approaching the Titan. I don't know if they have to go past the Titan to get to New Kaon and the Haven or what, but it seems like they're conveniently going past the Titan when Flame War happens to see Cannonball's murderer, the Wrecker known as Rodimus. Because remember, when we left at the end of the last issue, the Wreckers had been summoned, signaled to come to the Titan by Slicer. I guess they arrived before these Decepticon rebels did. We get another flashback to the Titan net in Iacon, which was almost destroyed by city crashers, Windblade and Lightbright. Not the game Lightbright, a Transformer Lightbright. But it's interesting that Windblade isn't a city speaker here. Windblade is a city crasher. Windblade distracts Cannonball, and a fight ensues. In the present, Flame War swears revenge, and she basically rushes in haphazardly against Rodimus. Rodimus shoots and kills Hailstorm. As quick as that. Slipstream flies in and tries to take the belligerent Flame War kind of out of the heat of battle. But Flame War breaks free and falls toward Rodimus while he's shooting his blasters at her. So she's like falling toward him. He's shooting his blasters at her, right? Blasters blazing. And we go to another flashback. Where she's yelling at Starscream for abandoning Megatron. And Starscream says that he followed Megatron's orders and retreated. Flame War ends up waking up in the present. So we've learned that she's kind of impetuous. She doesn't really think things through. She's very gung-ho, but I think that's because she's young and a little too over-enthusiastic. Anyway, she wakes up in the present next to, of all people, Optimus Prime, who's been captured. And she thinks Soundwave has also been captured because she hears his voice. Rodimus drags Optimus to Ratchet for a procedure. We don't know what this procedure is going to be. But that's the same time when Flame War realizes, oh, Soundwave is not there. She's hearing his voice through Blaster's head. Slicer says that she is only alive to be a bargaining chip with Megatron later on, should Megatron cause a problem in Ultra Magnus's plans. Slicer and Flame War talk about Soundwave's voice and his message. Slipstream tries a rescue attempt. Again, she asks what Ratchet is doing to Optimus. When I say she asks what Ratchet is doing to Optimus, Flame War asks Slicer what Ratchet is doing to Optimus. Slicer says that maybe Magnus wants to see what he's like in his colors in a mirror. That's not really clear. Those lines aren't clear. We don't really know what the procedure is, but something is going on with Optimus Prime and Ultra Magnus. Slicer gets shot, basically, and by the end, it looks like the Titan is waking up. It looks like the Wreckers, or at least Springer, is next to the Titan, so do the Wreckers already have control of the Titan at this point? And they're kind of standing toe-to-toe with Megatron and Soundwave. So something is going on with Magnus and Optimus. Flame War and Slipstream are kind of with Slicer. And outside of Metroplex's body, we see that, yeah, okay, we have the Titan now starting to stand up and move. Springer is there. Other Wreckers presumably are there. And Megatron, and Soundwave are also there. So there's a lot going on as we go into the last issue. This was an okay issue. I think the flashbacks were handled pretty well. I think it's interesting to set up some unanswered questions going into what is going to be the climax and the conclusion. I don't really like the character Flame War. She's too young, too impetuous. She doesn't think things through. She's too angry. She's just so angry. And I get it. Like, she was close to Cannonball and looked up to him and stuff. I understand the layers to her character, but her character just... it didn't land with me. I'm not a fan of her personification. If there's one thing that I do usually give IDW credit for, it's their original characters. And I don't know if Flame War was an original character for IDW or not. To me, she was. It's just, I found her annoying more than anything. As far as the story goes, it's okay. I don't think it's as strong as issue 2 and issue 3, but it's okay. And there's a clear difference between the present and the flashbacks, even in terms of coloration and look. You can easily tell that there's a main difference here. R.I.P. Hailstorm, since you got taken out. And now we reach the climax. This is issue 5 of Shattered Glass 2. Now, when we reached the climax of Shattered Glass 1, and we went through it, I was very disappointed. It had an open-ended ending, and we didn't know at the time that there was going to be a Shattered Glass 2. As far as we knew, it was a limited series of 5 issues, and I, for one, really don't like open-endedness. It kind of ended with the presumption that, I guess, Goldbug won. He got Starscream's spark, and Metroplex seems to be waking up, and that's the way things ended, with like a the end and a question mark. I always detest storytelling like that. Now, if IDW knew that we were going to get a Shattered Glass 2 at the time, then you know what? There should have been something relayed to the fans so we knew that this wasn't the end of the story. That wasn't done. If they didn't know, then they should have done a standalone story that could stand on its own merits without needing anything else added to it. And that's not what they did. They gave us a good beginning and a middle, but the end was a hodgepodge mess. Will the end for Shattered Glass 2 be any better? We already know that a Grimlock has been confirmed. I'm sure that they could do other ones if it's successful enough. But, again, learning from the past, did they do a better job with this last issue? Well, here's the way the issue goes. Again, written by Danny. This time Guido returns to do the art. So, we see the Titan and Shattered Glass Cosmos, Frenzy, and Rumble. And injured Megatron tells Soundwave to, go stop Magnus before he has full control over Metroplex. Ravage will stay behind to protect Megatron and get him to, all the other cons in safety. So, Soundwave looks like he's going to kind of be the big hero. We'll see. Soundwave surmises that Magnus is looking to replace Optimus Prime as the leader of, I guess, that segment of Autobots. Soundwave hears Metroplex's screams because we learned that Soundwave is able to read minds. He says Metroplex is in agony, but he also hears Starscream crying underneath. So both Metroplex and Starscream are both in agony. He brushes off Springer, right? Springer tries to fight him. He makes short work of him. Soundwave rescues Slicer, who kind of got shot by, I can't remember if it was Flame War or Slipstream. One less record to worry about, and was after falling out when they had their whole kerfuffle in the last issue, and he's not taken offline. Like I said, Soundwave kind of rescues him. Slicer asks him if he heard the same voices. Slicer says, that it must be true. You're able to read thoughts. So, like, Slicer's a little bit starstruck because he's been listening to Soundwave's voice for a while, and now he actually gets to, like, hear Soundwave in real life and meet him. Springer jumps to action, right? Because though he got brushed off, he wasn't stopped. He jumps to action, and to everyone's shock, Slicer shoots him. Soundwave notes how Slicer's mind is not silent. Slicer turns on Magnus and basically says, you know what, maybe there's a different way of doing things. So Soundwave takes out 2 more wreckers as Slicer is injured, and he doesn't want Slicer to risk being hurt anymore. They happen to be on the... they happen upon the like outer shell of Magnus's body, like what we think of as Ultra Magnus, that outer shell, and it's kind of just like laying there and shivering, and like it's got parts taken off of it and stuff. It's kind of a junk heap, but Magnus's spark isn't inside. Soundwave determines that's not Magnus in that remains of a body. It's Optimus Prime, and the voice box has been detached. So while Prime is angry, frustrated, and Soundwave can hear Prime's thoughts, at the same time, Prime can't say anything because there's no voice box, and like basically he's trapped in this body, right? So like something dark has happened. Then we see Ultra Magnus, who's now the like blue and black colors of like his inner core robot. He's basically in Optimus Prime's body, and it kind of looks like is it Magna Convoy, I think is the blue and black color scheme. So it looks like the body switch between Magnus and Optimus Prime worked, and Magnus also got like a new paint scheme, a new skin basically, right? So Magnus berates Soundwave, and Soundwave makes fun of Magnus's speech patterns and says, you might look like Optimus, but you don't sound like him. Slicer warns Soundwave that he's outnumbered, right? Magnus is here, the Wreckers are here, you're outnumbered. Ratchet warns Magnus that he needs to, stand back, sit back. He's basically just like, reborn. He's having to relearn his motor skills, his new center of gravity. But Magnus pushes Ratchet aside and says that he has all of his wreckers standing with him. This is going to be easy. And Magnus tells Slicer to kill Soundwave. But Slicer's thoughts have another plan in mind that he's able to like mentally project to Soundwave. He says basically that he has a plan to knock out the wreckers and take Ratchet. So Soundwave Soundwave is distracted by Metroplex and Starscream's screams getting closer and closer to being synchronized, and he worries about what will happen when the screams of Metroplex and Starscream synchronize. Will that like destroy the Titan, or will it cause the Titan to like lose its mind and become insane, or fall under the control finally of Ultra Magnus? So Metroplex basically rages and writhes in agony, and this causes chaos inside his body, and blaster fire ensues between the Rising Star Autobots and the Wreckers and Slicer and Soundwave, and kind of like all heck breaks loose, right? Soundwave beats Drift, then he takes Drift's sword and he throws it through Rodimus's head before Rodimus is able to hurt Slicer. Slicer and takes Ratchet and leaves. Jetfire gets released from the lasso that tied him up from the Wreckers, and Jetfire and Soundwave leave to go to Starscream Spark, right? Soundwave isn't sure where it is, but Jetfire says, like, I can take you there. Soundwave says that he will sever the link between Metroplex and Starscream, and then Jetfire has to take Starscream Spark to safety. So Magnus shows up, and he swears to destroy all cons, all Autobots. He's going to destroy everyone and rule the Titan. Soundwave says, you had to steal Optimus's skin as you were too afraid to try and lead without it. You're not bot enough, basically, right? They end up fighting. And it gets to a point where Magnus is winning and he holds Soundwave over his head. Magnus gets shot in the chest by Slicer. So Slicer is kind of the one that takes out Magnus. Metroplex starts to fall back down after severing the link with Starscream's Spark. Laserbeak says that he took Megatron away to safety already. Now he's going to save Soundwave. Slicer and Ratchet leave, right? They're gone. They're safe. Jetfire is gone with the Spark. Prowl, who's not really been involved, is shown looking on, and we kind of end things with Soundwave saying, like, he doesn't seek to fight, but if he has to, Cybertron's worth it. The end. Now, by the end of it, the Titan has fallen, right? Jetfire's gone with Starscream's Spark. Maybe one day we can get him a body. Ratchet and Slicer, they're still alive and kind of gone off on their own. Prowl is, I guess, still in control of wherever Prowl's in control of. And now Soundwave is the big hero, and Megatron is safe after being injured. This is a nice, clean ending. If there's more story to come, cool. We know that other characters exist. We know that Prowl is still prowling around, right? And things could happen. But if there is never another part to this story, if this is it, then this is okay. Was it perfect? No. I mean, there was no Terminus Blade. There were several wreckers rather than very, very few followers and friends to Ultra Magnus. The body type was certainly different, but again, he hates Optimus. He wants to usurp power. He, instead of getting an upgrade body type like Optimus, he actually takes Optimus's body. This is a revisioning. It's not exactly true to what we know, but I think it's okay because it takes hints from what we know. I think the first Shattered Glass story was weaker. I think the second one is better. And for those of us who are true fans of Shattered Glass, I think while this is a revisioning, it tends to fall closer akin to what us fans kind of see as the lore and the story, just with a few little tweaks. I wish that they had just built on the established lore, but if you're going to revision it, at least respect the fans enough to stick to the main tenets and the main characterizations that they should have. Was Shattered Glass 2 perfect? No, but it was way better than the original, and I can honestly say that by the end of issue 5, this is the best story that I have ever written, ever read from IDW. Go figure. I mean, they've lost the rights to do these stories, and the last thing that I read from them is the best thing that I've ever read from them. It is what it is. And here we are once again, and here is the story once again. So, the very first issue, I found I had to read it 3 times because I found it sort of convoluted. Here's the thing. The time jumps, as I mentioned, done here, and probably in the first one, I can't remember now, but certainly in this series, is accomplished via, I guess, the changing of corners of panels. So if it's a flashback, the panels have rounded corners. If it's in the present, they have very sharp 90-degree corners, as I stated. I think that that's clever, and it's a consistent thing, but it's so subtle that it's easy to not notice, or it's so subtle that it's easy to sometimes think you're in one time period when you are in the other time period. And I didn't feel like that there were clear transitions between the two. That made the first issue a bit convoluted, and like I said, I resulted in having to read it 3 times. To me, that's not good storytelling. And when I read it the 3rd time, I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm just going to read the whole of the story with the rounded corners first, the whole of the story with the squared off corners last. And I found that that helped things in terms of setting up the story. By the end, it's very clear, but I felt like the 19 pages that came before that were gobbledygook. So I wasn't a huge fan of the start of it, even though we do have a very clear stance at the end of that issue. Then we get to issue number 2. And I'll say this, issue number 2 really does focus on this character, so the cover is accurate. And it's a complete kind of character arc, a complete story, where we also get the development of Slicer and the villainous Rodimus Prime. Well, actually not even Prime, he's just called Rodimus. It is, I think, the single best comic, Transformers or otherwise, that I've ever read from IDW. This is the standard that every single solitary story that they've ever done needs to be to, and I don't think that that's been the case. Issue 3 was still quite strong. Not quite as strong as issue 2, but still very strong with a lot of character development of Slicer, which I did like to see. And I do support it. Plus, we get to see a lot more of the evolution of Ultra Magnus. And I'll say this, while the body type is different, and while the motivations and machinations are different than the traditional, his overall personality, his overall role is kind of the same. And his overall goals are also kind of the same. They're just reached in a bit of a different manner. So I feel like the development of the characters in the story through the second version of Shattered Glass is a little more true to what fans, true fans, really want. They were already committed to Sparks. They should have called it Embers in the first go-around, and they should have called it Embers here, but you were already committed to Sparks. So, yeah, I was okay with both of that. Then we get to issue number 4. I went into this issue knowing absolutely, positively nothing about this character. I think the issue is pretty good, honestly. We do get a flashback, and we get kind of an explanation there as to why Flame War has the motivation she does and why she seeks revenge on a certain character that she does. However, my very first introduction to this character is her being intoxicated off of Energex. Granted, she's mourning the loss of someone, but that's how you deal with your mourning. You go to, like, substance abuse, basically. And then she complains a lot. She's a little too outgoing, a little too boisterous. I gotta say, if she rhymed, she would be as annoying as Wheelie to me. I don't like the characterization of Flame War. I don't know if her positive universe counterpart is very different, because, of course, this is the Shattered Glass counterpart, right? Maybe she's far more brooding and serious. Maybe I would dig her positive universe counterpart. But I absolutely, positively didn't dig it here. I thought that she had a great reason to mourn. I thought she had a great reason to want revenge, and I even understand why she would be overzealous in going for that. But the way she presents herself, her belligerence, and the way she deals with her grief, I didn't like any of that. None of it. I didn't support any of it. It wasn't my thing. So, while I thought issue 1 started off kind of rough, 2 was the best thing I ever read from IDW, 3 was okay. I felt like this is where things started to go off the rails just a little bit, and it was only because I didn't like the character, which is ironic, because normally the one thing that I give IDW credit for is strong, unique characters, like characters that are created by them, really. And I felt like this one missed the mark. At least it did for me. But then we get to the last issue. Was the conclusion going to be more palpable? Was it going to be more rewarding for going through this entire journey than it was for Shattered Glass 1? I think had we known when Shattered Glass 1, when that first 5-issue story happened, had we known that a second was going to come, I think I would have been far more forgiving on the open-ended nature of that story, right? The conclusion to that story. Here, at this point, again, as far as we know, this is the end of the Shattered Glass story for IDW. Though we do know that there is an upcoming Grimlock that is going to be released in Shattered Glass, we, as far as I know, have not had any confirmation that this story is going to continue in any form or fashion. As we go through here, we really understand the menace and the danger that was the Titan that Goldbug apparently had control of in the beginning, at the end of the first story. So we find out that that Titan is, quite the MacGuffin. We certainly get more evolution of more characters. I think the hero is an unlikely hero. And the villain, I think, is a logical villain. If you know the kind of lore of Shattered Glass, when you get to kind of the villain here, you're like, you know what? Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And his motivations are very close to what his motivations always were. Though the allies are much different than what the traditional allies have been. Nevertheless, I think the allies, for this being held within the universe of IDW, I think the allies make sense for the villain, if that makes sense to you. Remember, I'm trying to be spoiler-free here. I can say this. When we get to the end here, there is a definite end. If there is a continuation of the story, there's enough sort of threads and open doors that the story can potentially continue down other avenues. But there's also enough here that is a definitive close where we leave certain characters off in logical locations that if this is the end, if this is it, then I'm quite content with it. I feel like Shattered Glass 2 was exponentially better than Shattered Glass 1. And I feel like Shattered Glass 2 was a much bigger service to the fans of Shattered Glass than 1 was. It's almost like they listened to the feedback from last year's first outing of Shattered Glass and did what they could to try and make sure that this second story, or second part to the story, respected the fans of Shattered Glass far more than what the first story did. At least that's my take. Go figure. IDW has lost the Transformers license, and I think Shattered Glass 2 might be one of the best stories that I've ever read from that company. Who could have predicted that? Certainly not I. Let me know what you think about Shattered Glass 2 if you read it, or just what you think of the story if you went right through here and got the whole lowdown with the spoilers and everything. I appreciate you guys coming by, giving me some of your extremely valuable time. I do know how important it is to you. If you're in a position to help the channel to grow, you can use the donate link. Check us out on Patreon. See what we have to offer to you through spring. Or of course, you can hit the join button at any given time and become a channel member. Please and thank you. Also, please hit the subscribe button. Stick around, have some fun with us here on the channel. And don't forget that somehow, some way, each and every single solitary day, you do make a difference in the world. And I look forward to the next time that you and I get together to have another visit, either in the live streams on Thursday nights, at the stop motion premieres, or the old-fashioned way right here inside the videos.